Well, I just want to say to everybody, thank you very much for coming to the Economic Club of Miami event. We've really been growing a lot. So as I was mentioning to these gentlemen, just 2.5 years ago, we had about 35 members, and now we're up to 325 and counting. So probably more members applying right now. So, but really appreciate everybody who's been part of the club. I wanted to actually just recognize, and I'm sorry I didn't do this last week. So if either today or last week is your first event here as a new member, I'd love you to stand so we can recognize you. Well, thank you, and welcome to the Economic Club of Miami. And for those who may be watching on video or maybe here as a guest, if you'd like to join, just go to our website, econclubmiami.org. You can go to the membership tab there and just apply for membership. And we'd love to have you. We've had quite a lot of events just in the last 12 months alone. We've hosted two governors of the Federal Reserve, Chris Waller and Adriana Kugler. We hosted another gubernatorial candidate, Byron Donalds, and then today, David Jolly. We've also hosted local Miami Congressman Carlos Jimenez. And last week, the CEO of Brightline, Patrick Goddard, who's here. Did I miss him? I saw him in the other room. I guess he's just scoping out, making sure everyone's on top of their job today. We've also had some lunch and learn sessions on practical AI and on crisis management. I know Cameron was part of the panel there for the crisis management one. And we've also hosted some big-time innovative entrepreneurs like Peter Thiel and Joe Lonsdale. So that's just in the last 12 months alone. So we've got a lot being planned right now for the coming months, and we look forward to having you join us again in some of our future events, including some of just the social networking opportunities we have as well. Today, we have another fun, exciting event, a couple great leaders here in the state of Florida. Let me introduce them to you.
One leader.
Let me introduce them to you. Of course, we have Michael Putney and David Jolly. Michael here, who is on your right, has been one of South Florida's most trusted journalists for more than 3 decades. He joined WPLG Local 10 back in 1989 as a senior political reporter and host of This Week in South Florida, where his thoughtful, fact-based reporting helped shape public understanding of politics and government across our region. Before his television career, Michael worked in Washington and New York for the National Observer, Time Inc., and the Miami Herald. Over the years, he's earned 2 Emmy Awards, reported from Havana on major historical events, and interviewed nearly every major figure in Florida politics. Michael is known for his integrity, sharp questioning, and deep commitment to public service through journalism. So please join me in welcoming Michael Putney. Michael will also recognize my Florida tie here. Who is the only person that wore this tie all the time? Yeah, former Florida Governor and U.S. Senator Bob Graham. So I've got the Bob Graham Florida tie on today. And now it's my pleasure to also introduce David Jolly. David grew up in Florida as the son of a pastor and went on to represent his hometown community in Congress from 2014 to 2017. During his time in Washington, he focused on helping veterans and seniors, protecting Florida's environment, and taking on government corruption, a fight that earned him national recognition, including a feature on 60 Minutes. Known for his independent streak, David's honesty and willingness to challenge partisanship and has earned praise from journalists across the political spectrum. Since leaving Congress, he's become a regular political analyst on MSNBC and a respected voice featured in Time, The Washington Post, CNN, and more. Today, he and his wife Laura are raising their family in Pinellas County, and David is now a candidate for the governor of Florida. So please help me in welcoming David Jolly. And now I'll turn over the microphone to the man who's used to the microphone, and that is Michael. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you. The Economic Club of Miami is a force to be reckoned with, and to be here with David Jolly, who I think will be the Democratic nominee for governor. And even though it's not the best thing in the world these days in Florida to be the Democratic nominee for governor, I think he is going to surprise a lot of people. Well, it is the Economic Club. So, David, let's begin with the economy. Florida's economy, to me, appears to be in pretty good shape. $117 billion state budget. It's got to be balanced by law. The the state bond debt is in shape. It's not, too overbalanced. And unemployment is overall 3.8%. Inflation is between 3 and 6%, depending on where you are in the state. So many people, including people in this room, might say the state of Florida economically is in pretty good shape. What do you say?
That the cost of housing is eating up more of everyone's take-home income every month. The cost of utilities continues to eat into that. The cost of transportation continues to eat into that. Frankly, the cost of education, if you're part of Florida's Choice program, yes, the economy is growing, and where my Republican friends have contributed to that, let's keep doing what they've been doing. But this economy is leaving people behind. And I say that as a former Republican, someone who will always look to the private sector, the efficiency of the markets first and foremost. But where public policy meets the economy is to recognize that I believe, not everybody agrees with this, I believe that the government needs to make sure the economy is working for everybody, and it's not. Now, I think where my Democratic friends have maybe gone wrong recently is we shouldn't condemn success, we should congratulate success. We should embrace capitalism. But where we can insist on fair capitalism that lifts everybody up, that allows people to affordably achieve rents or home ownership, reduce the cost of insurance in a state that has denied climate change, where we have had a state imbalance education in favor of vouchers that now require tuition on top of vouchers. Sure, economic growth is there. Real wages are somewhere stagnant to just improving, but people are being left behind. And I think if there's a difference in the candidates right now, it's probably on that point. I'm not satisfied that economic growth is the only measure of the state's fitness. I think whether or not the economy is bringing everybody along is the better measure.
Yeah. The Alice study, which was put out by the United Way of Florida, says that about half the people in Florida, half the families in Florida, are struggling just to get by, to put food on the table, to pay the rent, put gas in the car, pay the utility bill, and that this is increasingly hard for these folks. Where would you begin with affordability?
Yeah, let's break that down a little bit. This is really critical. So Alice is asset limited, income constrained, but employed. Working families, working individuals without sufficient savings, whose income does not anticipate much growth, who cannot live past the next financial disruption, an increase in the healthcare expense, a blown tire, a car repair. Alice means asset limited, income constrained, but employed, working class individuals. That is now 51% of the state, 51% of the state. I'm going to give you a real example. Look, I mean all of this respectfully, but this is a race for Florida's future. I'm going to draw a contrast right now to put a finer point on this. My opponent in this race, who is a guest here, Byron Donalds, yesterday said the answer to healthcare policy is to have policies that just provide catastrophic care and not comprehensive care, and let people rely on their savings to pay for health care. If you're 51% of the state, you don't have savings. What Byron was talking about is not healthcare policy. He was talking about a product, but that product is insufficient to solve the needs of the Alice community. And so where do you see this? Where's the affordability crisis in the state of Florida? Number one, it's through access to housing, whether that's rents or home ownership. The ability of a longtime homeowner to stay in their home because of a failing homeowners insurance market, because we've denied climate science and climate change. The ability of a first-time homebuyer to enter the market because the run-up on taxes when they buy that from a 20-year homesteaded owner is too much to bear. Or the cost of rents. There are a number of areas where there are policies to pursue, but cost of housing is number one. Cost of healthcare is number two. Right. That's an area where this state has refused to expand Medicaid, where the current majority in Tallahassee and Washington want the ACA subsidies to expire. Those are policy decisions. It's not a swipe at my Republican friends. They will not pursue the home insurance plan that I have. I think we need a state catastrophic fund to remove hurricane coverage from the private market altogether. They call it socialism. I just call it cheaper insurance. I think we should expand Medicaid. I think we should support the ACA tax credits. I think we need first-time homebuyer tax relief that gives a $150,000 homestead exemption to the new homebuyer. These are policies that draw a real distinction between myself and those on the other side of the aisle in Tallahassee. And it is simply because we have an affordability crisis. This state is gripped by an affordability crisis. Pensacola to Miami, Naples to Jacksonville, our rural counties, and it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, Independent, or Democrat. One of the reasons that this race is so tight is because we have a generational affordability crisis that, honestly, I am amazed my Republican colleagues in Tallahassee refuse to accept, because their refusal is at their own peril.
The median price of a home, single-family home, in Miami-Dade County right now is $670,000. The median price for a condo is $405,000. These figures are almost replicated in Broward. So I guess my question would be, is the American dream of home ownership, is that a thing of the past?
In Florida, it may be. But I don't think we should give in to letting Florida just become a home for the rich and the reckless. I think it should be a home for everybody. And so what does that mean? What can we constructively do about housing in this state to make it more affordable? First, so understand, all of you know this, Miami is very unique, right? In terms of the cost of housing and some of the other economic challenges. We are not the Fed. We're not going to set interest rates. Supply and demand, we can have some impact on. The cost of insurance, we can have impact on, and the cost of taxes. So let's break that down a little bit. What does that mean where Tallahassee policies, different policies, could actually address the affordability crisis around housing? If we actually achieved a state catastrophic fund for hurricane and natural disasters, it would reduce property insurance in Florida by 60 to 70%. 60 to 70%. Go to your broker and ask them to price a policy. It's called X-Wind. X-Wind. Meaning traditional perils only, the tree falls, the pipe burst, a slip and fall. It cuts homeowners insurance by 60 or 70%. Most people can't do that because your mortgage requires you to have full coverage. It makes sense, right? I just think there is no longer a property insurance market capable of affordably covering natural disasters. You can make the argument it's market-based, sure, but where public policy has to step in is where it's not affordable. We need public policy solutions. A state cap fund would reduce property insurance by 60 or 70%. Generational property tax relief, not necessarily the repeal that Republicans are proposing in Tallahassee, but to identify where additional homestead exemptions reduce the cost. A first-time home buyer right now is paying more in insurance and taxes than the cost of the note. Miami may be one of the only exceptions simply because of the raw cost of housing. But then where do we get to the supply piece? Look, I think Live Local did a lot of good. But I think it also, I think there's some strategic problems in it. I think it restrains local control too much. We have to allow local communities to determine what their master plan looks like, what master zoning, master development looks like. It unduly restrained local communities. But the idea was, how do we create additional supply? We can do that through additional budget for affordable and workforce housing. We can tie it to income levels. We can tie it to proximity to work within certain trades, teachers, first responders, whatever it might be. Budgets are values. If we decide to spend more money on workforce and affordable housing, extrapolate out the models that have worked, right? The developer that takes a 40-year agreement, either through tax benefits or land swaps or whatever that might be, in exchange for keeping rents and cost of housing at a certain level. What does that look like for the next 20 years in Florida? Because right now we are on a path that will be unsustainable for many. Young people are leaving the state at a higher rate than ever in the state of Florida. Retirees are still moving here. God bless them. Thank you for the retirees moving here. But in raw economic terms, we're not getting human capital contributing here. We're actually getting retirees who are spending their resources here, but we're losing our human capital because of the cost of housing. And I would also argue because culture wars make people feel unwelcome in the state.
Not as an aside, but you mentioned Live Local. And I'm reminded, as I'm sure most of you probably do, that in Key West, the voters of the city of Key West a couple of years ago voted overwhelmingly that they didn't want very large cruise ships to come in and dock there. And then the owner of the major privately owned dock in Key West gave the Republican Party, gave the governor a huge amount of money. And guess what? The legislature said, no, let's pass a law and the ships will be able to dock. I guess my question to you is, David, as governor, what would you do to make sure that decisions made reasonably by local governments go ahead and are played out.
Yeah. It starts by not taking $1 million from the cruise lines to overrule what voters actually wanted to happen. I used to belong to a Republican Party that believed in local control. Governments made closest to the people are best, are most efficient. Key West was a good example. Local voters said, we don't want the large cruise ships here for reasons of density and environmental integrity. In Sarasota, local voters voted for open primaries and only their municipal elections. What happens when, unfortunately, in the last 10 years of Florida history, when a blue community votes for something that red Tallahassee disagrees with, the whole Republican principle of local control gets thrown out the window. If you look at the post-hurricane SB 180, Tallahassee said, hey, local communities, you no longer get to determine your master plan, your master zoning and development plans. When you look at Live Local, they put handcuffs on the abilities of local communities. I don't think we should be afraid of local democratic elections and local democratic leaders. It might not always fall the way you want, right? As an economic principle, I'm not somebody that would generally support rent control. I don't think that's the right answer for statewide. I've told a group of young voters I would not advance rent control at the state level. But if a local community, through their elected leaders, decides that in some pockets of their housing, that's an appropriate measure for a locally supported development, who is Tallahassee to step in and interfere with local decision-making? Look, again, some of the Live Local provisions, some of the provisions of this SB 180 coming off the storms are good and well-intended. But even the Republican sponsor of SB 180 has said we've got to revisit it. And part of that is because we put handcuffs on the people you elected at your local level. We've suggested that somehow Tallahassee always knows best if they make a decision Tallahassee disagrees with. I just think that's wrong.
David, as you well know, as we all know, property taxes is very much in the news. State House Speaker Danny Perez of Miami-Dade says there are 8 major bills that are going to be introduced in the legislature. Governor DeSantis is even talking about daily about doing away with property taxes. What is your idea about making property taxes more reasonable, more fair?
I'm glad Speaker Perez doesn't agree with Ron DeSantis that at the state level we should defund education and defund the police, because that's what happens if you repeal all property taxes without a plan for the revenue, unless you're willing to step up and say we're going to increase sales taxes by 3 cents, 4 cents, 5 cents. Then where's that revenue come from? And so what was encouraging to see come out of the House is that they protected law enforcement and education. Now, there's still not a rational conversation about how they replace the funding that they want to repeal. But as I've said to my Democratic friends, let's see what the final proposal is. Maybe it makes economic sense when they put it in front of us. Look, I think we need to worry as a state about the next 10 to 20 years of our economy and where our revenue really derives from. We have 3 main trades, or 3 main economic silos, if you will: construction, ag, and tourism. We need to ensure they continue to grow. But do we need to start to look more at tourist development tax dollars to fund some priorities? Whether it's a state catastrophic fund for insurance, whether it's public education that's been abandoned. We don't have a crisis of convention centers in the state, but that's how we require our tourist development tax dollars to be used. Maybe we should use it on some home state priorities outside of tourism. So this gets into a conversation where, look, one of the things, I was a lifelong Republican. I spent 5 or 6 years as an independent. It was an incredible time in my political journey. Today I'm a Democrat. And I sometimes joke, and I realize, I'm sorry, this is a joke. But as a Democrat, I get to accept math. And I get to accept math and acknowledge it and talk about it. And so that's fine. Let's talk about new tax plans, but let's talk about the revenue as well, because we already as a state are heading towards a bit of an economic cliff about the time DeSantis leaves office. Our revenue and our spending is not matching up. And in the era of Doge is trivial compared to what we actually need to do to assess the economic forecast of the state. I just think we need to have an honest conversation. The one area where I have said that I know we need relief for property taxes is for first-time home buyers. Some in this room, we benefit from Save Our Homes and Affordability. 20 years ago in this state, in the 2006 election, Charlie was running for governor. The crisis we faced in this state 20 years ago was insurance and taxes. We had the housing run-up of the 2000s, right? We had the bubble and all that stuff. And longtime homeowners could no longer stay in their homes. We didn't have Save Our Homes or portability because as the 2000s started, we were wrestling with this notion that all of a sudden a 20-year homeowner saw their tax bill double, triple, whatever it might be, depending on where you were. We passed Save Our Homes and portability to allow longtime homeowners to stay in their home. That was smart. Today, we have the inverted problem. First-time home buyers, some of you may have experienced this. You buy a property from a 20-year homesteader, and that second-year tax bill can jump dramatically on you. Dramatically. So what do we do for the first-time home buyer? Is it a $150,000 homestead exemption? Is it a 3, 4, 5-year step-up in basis for that first-time home buyer? But I do hope whatever we see from Tallahassee accommodates the first-time home buyer in a way we currently accommodate long-time homeowners.
David, let me ask you about reproductive rights. You are the son of a Baptist minister. He had a church here in Southwest Miami-Dade, and you lived several years of your life, you and your family here, and you were brought up to believe that abortion was a sin. You have come full circle, and you believe that, as you say, lawmakers ought to get out of our bedrooms, and it's, a woman has a right to choose. How did you make this evolution? A skeptic might say, well, it's politically opportunistic. What do you say?
No, I made this evolution before I ever became a candidate. I actually made this evolution as I was serving in Congress. And I want to speak about my faith here for a little bit, not to evangelize, and also to tell you that for the first time in a long time, I think that the state of Florida needs a governor who leaves their personal and private faith at the steps to the State House. But I speak openly about my faith. It's part of who I am. It's part of my introduction. I tell people I was born in Pinellas County. I lived in Miami for 10 or 12 years over by what is now Tropical Park. I lived in Pasco County. I lived in Pensacola. I started out as a securities attorney at a big New York firm by the name of Fried Frank. I worked on Capitol Hill. I'm married with 2 kids who are 6 and 4. 6 and 4. I'm 52. We always include that stuff in an introduction, but one of the most important things to me is my faith. And so I talk about my faith, but I talk about it not to evangelize, but to also suggest that as a person of faith, I think the culture wars are ripping us apart. We need to get to become a state where everyone is empowered, regardless of the color of your skin, where you were born, who you love, or who you worship. That's a faith teaching of mine. That doesn't challenge my faith or dilute my faith. It strengthens my faith to be able to recognize that everyone is created special in the image of a God, whether we understand it or not. That's a special thing. I speak openly about my faith. So yes, look, my journey in politics, reproductive freedom is a great example. There are others when it comes to campaign finance laws and others on guns. I've made a journey on policy, but I haven't made a journey of values. So let me give you the value orientation and then the reproductive freedom conversation. I was never a good enough Republican for the Republican Party. I came up a Bush 41 Republican when the Republican Party was getting way away from Bush 41. Fought the Tea Party and lost. I fought Donald Trump and lost. Went to the House floor, the only Republican in 2016 to actually call on Donald Trump to drop out of the race, and I never pivoted, never changed, and never came around. I ended up leaving the party. Spent 6 years as an independent, now as a Democrat. What has not changed, and this was a lot of personal introspection, is the values that I have always seen in politics that I wanted to emulate and fight for, was that the economy should work for everybody. We've talked about that. The economy should work for everybody, not just the most successful. The government has a role in our lives. Whether we like it or not, it's our government. It should be lean and efficient, but we pay for it. And there are some places where only government can actually provide the services that are needed for our seniors, our veterans, our storm victims. Imagine storm victims without the reliability of some type of government response in a time of need. Safe communities, right? Safe communities. We should fight crime. We should be Democrats who are tough on crime, but we don't have to fight communities to fight crime. I think this governor's fighting communities looking for crime. But government has a role in fighting crime. We have a role in providing for excellence in public education. So one value, the economy should work. 2, the government has a role in our lives. The third is simply everyone should be empowered, right? Regardless of the color of your skin, where you were born, who you love, or who you worship. Those values have been consistent all the way through. But I've changed on some issues. So I got to Congress. First time I was ever elected to anything was Congress. First time I held the public trust was Congress. And as I served, I started to apply some of my kind of traditional Republican beliefs and views to voting, right? To hard questions that we were facing. And what I started to realize and reconcile then is that I was wrongly applying my faith teachings to a constitutional question of reproductive freedom. I got it wrong. But as I was doing that, I felt the dissonance, right? I represented, as a Republican, a district Obama won twice. I wasn't gerrymandered in a safe Republican district. I had to wake up every day thinking about what's the right thing to do for the people who've entrusted me to serve. And so I realized that I was conflating my faith teachings with a hard constitutional question. And I ended up beginning to move as I served. I became the only Republican to vote against the Planned Parenthood investigation while I served. When Republicans moved to take, I think it was about $400 million from Planned Parenthood of federal funding, it was just going to go away, $400 million less in reproductive care. I introduced a compromise to move that $400 million to community health centers to ensure access to care in underserved communities. I soon got to a full recognition and embrace of the Roe-Casey framework as the right balance between the constitutional protection of reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy with what the court wrestled with, which was how do we balance that against the state's interest in the viability of a fetus? And I started to see how the court actually wrestled with this notion of starting first with individual and personal freedom, but recognizing that the state has an interest in the viability of a fetus. It was a balancing test that Roe and Casey held for 50 years. And so maybe I arrived at that in the mid to late teens. That's been my position since. But here's the thing. A lot of critics like to say, Jolly's changed. Jolly's changed. The important part of the journey, which is why I share this with you, is that I didn't change because I wanted to run for governor. I changed because that's part of my story. And I don't think change is a bad thing. I actually think the problem in politics is people who won't change when they're actually faced with tough questions. Look, I entered supporting marriage equality. I was already there as a libertarian Republican, but I entered thinking that the traditional view of the Second Amendment and guns were the right public policy until I started serving and realized there are school shootings. There's a Pulse nightclub shooting. What am I going to do to be able to tell my kids that I actually tried to do something about it? And I get a little worked up here because my Republican friends have not done a damn thing about it. They refuse to. In every shooting, there's a fail point. With the Pulse nightclub, it was someone who was not allowed to board a plane, but they were allowed to buy a gun. That's a fail point. Las Vegas, it was a bump stock. Most school shootings, it's a kid with an access to a firearm who shouldn't have it because a parent failed to lock it up. What are you going to do about that is what I want to know from my Republican friends. I will not be a governor that ever takes a firearm from a law-abiding citizen, but I am going to fight like hell to stop the next school shooting. And that might mean we have more comprehensive and universal background checks. That might mean we have more enforcement around storage requirements. That might mean we ask voters in Florida to think about licensing and insurance and registration for firearm ownership and see what they think about it. I've moved on those issues because I served and I learned and I realized the impact. And I think what frustrates me, and you can hear it in my voice, is the number of Republican colleagues that I served with who I have watched who know the direction is wrong. They know it's wrong, but they have just fallen to wherever the party has decided to go because they want to protect their own job and not worried about the people they're serving. I apologize for preaching. As I told you, my father was a minister.
Amen. You're going to get a chance to ask some questions in just a minute, but I have one other obvious one, which is the demographics of voter registration in Florida. When Barack Obama ran in 2012, there were more than 500,000 more Democrats than Republicans. Now there are, 1.2 million more registered Republicans than Democrats. Used to be a purple state. Now it's a red state. So how does a blue candidate, how does a Democrat win? How do you win?
Well, when you put it that way, here's the good news. You don't have to be a registered Democrat to vote for a Democratic candidate for governor. We are not going to close the voter registration gap this cycle. As Democrats, we're not. We're going to try real hard. The party's going to try real hard. That's not our job this cycle. Our job this cycle is to elect a candidate that we believe reflects the values of our party. But how do we do that? There aren't enough Democrats in the state of Florida to elect a Democrat by herself. The reason I talk about the three values, the economy should work, the government should serve, we should be a place where everyone's welcome, is I think that unites our party, right? Our party can quickly fall into a circular firing squad. We've seen it. If we do that, we're going to lose. I talk about the values because it unites the emerging young progressive with the last blue dog standing somewhere in Alachua County. It unites our party around the values that we fight for, but they're values that are bigger than our party. If you're an independent or a Republican who realizes the affordability crisis is reducing your economic opportunity in the state of Florida, or your kids or your grandkids are choosing to leave and they don't want to call Florida home, if that's your case, you don't have to be a Democrat to recognize that the Democratic policies you're hearing from this candidate might make sense in a governor's race. If your kids are leaving because the culture wars are too much. And look, at 6 and 4, I don't know who my kids are going to love or who they're going to worship. But I can promise you this, under this regime, I shouldn't say regime, I apologize. It's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. Under this administration, if they grow up anything but a traditional white Christian family, if they're LGBTQ plus, or if they're an atheist or an agnostic, they have less value in this state. You better believe as a parent, I'm going to say you should get out of here. And so I think there are values that unite a new emerging coalition. Now here's the practical piece of this. We sometimes say, 4 years ago, Democrats lost by 18 points. That's right. Look, candidates are different. All candidates are different. I'm certainly a different candidate than Val and then Charlie and our CFO candidate. I'm different than Debbie, all people that I have great respect for. Candidates are different. I think I bring a little something than other candidates. But cycles are different. Cycles are different. In 22, I don't think a Democrat could have won statewide at any level, because the cycle was coming out of COVID. Incumbents were losing their shirts, except for Ron DeSantis, who had launched culture wars in the free state of Florida, and it was powerful. And Democrats didn't have an answer, and Democrats got their clocks cleaned. Now in 26, we have an affordability crisis at the state level that I believe has been created by policies or failure of policies coming from Republicans in Tallahassee who have had 30 years to do this. Now, notice what just happened in the last 20 minutes, because this is the final piece of how a Democratic governor gets elected. Not once did I mention the President of the United States, because this race isn't about the president. This race is about what Bob Graham and Lawton Chiles used to refer to as the responsible administration of the government. Are your kids getting educated? Can you get to work on time? Is there an economy that allows your family to stay and to grow? Can you access health care? Are we keeping your community safe? That's a governor's race. For those who want to litigate the direction of the country, I certainly have made my views known on TV over the last 10 years. But we've got a U.S. Senate race to do that. We've got congressional races to do that. This is a governor's race that performs differently than other races. It's how you get an Andy Beshear in Kentucky. It's how you get a Steve Bullock in Montana. If this race becomes a race that actually allows people to see a different view of their community and a different vision for their future in Florida, that's how we win. Voter registration isn't how we have to look at this. We have to look at whether or not there's an emerging coalition big enough for change. I would say as a strategist who's probably done 30 races, I've only been a candidate in 3 or 4. The way I look at it is 33% of the state is basically probably unavailable to me as a candidate. I'm going to fight like hell to get to them, right? But 33% of the state are loyal Republican voters regardless. Democrats have their part as well. But so 39% are registered Republicans. I believe we'll get 15% of that. That's 6 points off of that. 33 are loyal Republicans. I'm going to try to get them, but they're probably unavailable to us. But in the midst of a national change environment where elections in Florida have already swung by 15 or 16 points in congressional special elections, municipal and mayoral races are swinging from red to blue, in the midst of an affordability crisis in this state, to have 67% of the state available to us, where we're talking about values that create an economy where everyone is lifted up and culture wars that are ended so everybody is empowered again, I think that's a pretty powerful moment in Florida history. And that's why my wife and I made the decision to run for governor.
We're glad you did. Questions, and please make them questions and not speeches. Please.
My question is about the what's going on in D.C. right now with the shutdown. My question is, who's to blame? Republicans, Democrats?
So I laugh because I'm a kind of a career appropriator who have, for a period of about 15 years, went through every shutdown in one way or another, as a staff member or as a member. And as someone who always said we shouldn't never shut the government down. We shouldn't. I took a lot of hard votes as a Republican to keep the government open when a majority of our caucus insisted on shutting it down as Republicans. I think the two sides have a responsibility to govern. Here's the real fail point that we always skip past. The fiscal year ended September 30th. This whole shutdown is about whether or not we extend last year's funding for 3 or 4 weeks. They're so far from actually passing a budget that was due on September 30th because the entire system of regular order has completely broken down, and both parties bear that blame. That's been the pattern for 10 or 15 years. I was general counsel for the chairman of the Appropriations Committee when we used to actually get things done on time, but that's just not how politics are done anymore. I would say to my Republican friends, you ask for the keys to the kingdom, you got it, you own it. Figure it out. It's not good enough to say you need 60 votes in the Senate. Your job then is to get those 60 votes. You're the majority. Go get them. Do what it takes. You can't hang this on the minority party. Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. You can't hang this on Democrats. I would ask my Democratic friends to continue to work towards the ends that they're working. And I would tell you, just from a raw kind of analyst standpoint who's been through decades of shutdowns, I'm not sure my Democratic friends have anything left to lose at this point. I really mean that. And I think they're on the right side of the argument on this one, that they're fighting for affordable health care for America's families. In the state of Florida, more than 1 million Floridians are about to lose their health insurance next year as a result of the Medicaid cuts in the big, beautiful bill, as a result of the expiration of ACA tax credits. Look, when Byron Donalds and Ron DeSantis said this 2 days ago. Byron quickly followed him because there's this Ronald Byron thing going on where they can't figure out who's trying to lead the state, but I'll leave that to those folks on that side of the aisle. When they say the answer to all of this is catastrophic health plans where individuals should rely on savings, no, it's not. No, it's not. Not enough Floridians have savings. And so what Democrats nationally are doing is saying, look, in Florida, 1 to 1.4 million people might lose health care next year. If Democrats get tagged with participating in the government shutdown, and it's because they're fighting for more affordable health care, at a time, by the way, Gallup or someone today released that 6 out of 10 Americans are extremely worried about the cost of health care next year, Republicans then have a responsibility to do something about it. And so I think this one's going to go on for a long time. If I was still prognosticating, it's always dangerous. Take it for what it's worth. Donald Trump has always proven to be very transactional and to worry about his own numbers. And I think when Donald Trump realizes there's a benefit for him to prevent the increase in ACA health plans and prevent people from losing their health care, he's probably going to push his own team to solve it, even though it's arguably something they created. So I do think Democrats actually make advancements in their current fight for more affordable health care. And strategically, I'd say they got nothing left to lose. It's a long answer to say I think it starts and ends with Republicans' responsibility. You ask for the keys, you got them, you own it.
I would just simply add one thing is of the 1.4 million Floridians who may lose their health insurance at the first of the year if that subsidy is not continued, most of them in one community are in Hialeah. There are more people enrolled in the ACA in Hialeah than any other city in this state. Yes, sir.
Could you comment on the donation of Miami-Dade College land to the Trump Foundation for what I guess is going to be a library that can be seen for miles right next to Freedom Tower? And is there anything you could do about it as governor if it's a done deal?
I think it's a corruption of the system that this was allowed to happen, to build a hotel on land that was acquired for the future use of Miami-Dade College. And I think Eduardo Padron and others were right to challenge this and say, we should see if we can undo it. I don't know if we can. Here's the one thing. Look, I've made my convictions about this president very well known. I'm sure you'll see it in commercials next September, October. We should not be a state that just says we're going to oppose a presidential library. He's earned it. He's the president. I think Palm Beach would be a great place for it, not the current land. And I think it should be a library, not a hotel that the family makes a lot of money off of. And somewhere between grift and graft led this land donation. And I think it's wrong and should be undone. Can the next governor do that, undo it? I don't know. We're going to find out. I'll give you a little bit of an insight into my leadership. The one thing I know I can do is undo Alligator Alcatraz, because that land was taken from Miami-Dade based on an executive order of the governor. It wasn't taken because the trustees of Miami-Dade College voted to give that land over. If I undo DeSantis' emergency order, that land goes back to Miami-Dade College. The Miccosukee Nation's tribal rights are restored, and now we're not able to operate the detention facility in the Everglades. There are some immediate executive actions we can take. I imagine I will be one of only very few Democrats elected, and so we're going to have to figure out how we use the governor's office in ways we haven't seen before. That means using the general counsel's office to figure out what can we do through executive action in a number of these areas. Look, I think it's somewhere between grift and graft, I think, led to the land donation, and that would be an area, if we can undo it by executive action, I'm certainly going to do my part. But that's not to deny this president a home for his presidential library, should he continue to intend to have one here.
Hi, I heard property taxes mentioned in the general sense earlier. Do you have a detailed plan to eliminate property taxes or some other method that you would propose?
I don't have a proposal to eliminate property taxes because I'm not sure moving to a sales tax to replace the revenue is the right way to do it, because it's incredibly regressive and it hits lower income communities when you do that. And that's one of my great fears about the plan coming out of Tallahassee. So no, my proposal would be, what can we do for the first-time home buyer in this environment? Whether it's a homestead exemption for first-time home buyers or a 3, 4, 5-year step up in basis for first-time home buyers, I think we should start there. Let's see what Republicans put forward. And we'll consider as a state. I just am very skeptical. Look, I've been a Republican. Republican math never works. It never works. I took those votes in Congress. Republican math never works. I remember when we did what was called the doc fix for Medicare reimbursement rates for physicians. And remember, Republicans would always say it has to pay for itself. Well, it never does. It never does. And when they finally came under such immense pressure from physicians who needed their reimbursement rates lifted, I remember John Boehner saying, well, it'll work itself out in the next 10 to 20 years. Republican math doesn't work out, and I'm afraid what we're going to see from Tallahassee is a proposal that doesn't work. I would also tell you, based on my perspective, I don't think the House or the Senate wants to do what the governor wants them to do. So they got a lot to work out over the next 3 months to decide what they put in front of Florida's voters.
Thank you. Going back to government shutdown, it has been 21 days. Based on my very conservative estimate, it will costing us $2 billion per day. We are talking about $42 billion costs. As a future governor, or as anything that you may be able to do, what kind of approaches and policy would you be able to implement to stop the gamemanship in Washington?
Yeah, I love that question. Listen, I will tell you this. As someone who opposed Donald Trump every step of the way, I had hoped that the first thing he would do when he was elected is invite Chuck Schumer to the back porch of the White House, to invite Chuck Schumer to the back porch of the White House so they could start working out a deal, right? The art of the deal, the transactional president. He didn't. He decided to just obliterate the other side with scorched earth. I can tell you, should I have the opportunity to be elected, the first call I will make on election night is to Republican leaders in Tallahassee to say, let's go meet. Let's not waste the next 4 years of this state by fighting ideological contests that don't make sense and don't address the needs of Florida's people. There are a couple areas where I think we can immediately make progress on behalf of the values that I think Florida needs and that ultimately would vote for next November. One, through executive action, I get to begin to review and remove many of Ron DeSantis' appointees. That starts with the Surgeon General of the state of Florida. He's fired on day one should I be elected the governor of the state. We're going to put in place a Surgeon General that supports science and data and public health. We're going to put in place a commissioner of education that understands our choice schools are leaving kids behind. They don't have to teach a kid to read. They don't have to teach a kid to read in our choice schools. They get to kick them out if they can't read. That's the current Republican policies. But through administrative decisions and appointments, we can make a lot of progress. Look, on a state cap fund for insurance, this is an interesting example. It gets wonky, but we're at an economic club. What that proposal essentially is creating a sovereign wealth fund for the state of Florida. If we can actually fund a state catastrophic fund north of $30 billion, it would take several years to do that. We can remove all natural disaster risks from the private market. We can take out reinsurance from Lloyd's. We can use that fund to buy up income-producing properties in the other 49 states because we can't invest it in Florida for reasons of risk aversion. So we buy up toll roads and other income-producing structures. As I mentioned, my Republican friends call it socialism. Well, guess what? They started the first hurricane fund about 25 years ago, and it's used to bail out insurance companies, not homeowners. And they bragged this last cycle that hurricane fund is at about $8 billion. So maybe the opportunity to begin to work with Republicans is to say, look, you already started the hurricane fund. Let's move to the hurricane fund. Can we generate new revenue out of the tourist development tax fund or by taxing insurance companies who currently get to send their profits out of state and keep their losses here? If we required combined reporting, we could generate $3 billion a year. Could we start to get the corpus of that hurricane fund, Republican hurricane fund, north of the $30 billion level, and then we can own it together that we've actually solved insurance for the people of Florida? I'm in a very post-ideological stage of my career. I reject the left-right spectrum altogether. Being an independent was fantastic to be untethered from major party dogma. We just need big answers to big problems, and we're not getting that. I don't care who gets the credit. This is the first time I've been on the ballot in 10 years. I've been out of politics long enough to tell the truth. And I know that the fastest growing voter registration is still the independent voter because they're suspicious of the two major parties. And if I have an opportunity to lead with amplifying democratic values but build a new coalition that actually maybe inspires independents to be a part of this, creates political strength with Republicans, then God bless it. Then the state's better off. Who knows where the politics fall, but let's actually solve the problems that are currently being overlooked, I believe strongly, by the incumbents in Tallahassee.
Yeah, I think I have the mic right.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So I think a pretty divisive topic that hasn't really been discussed is immigration, which obviously is a pretty big topic for Florida in general. And keeping in mind that also you said you want to kind of reach across the aisle and trying to find a balance of doing what's best for Florida and for Floridians. At the same time, sorry, this is going to be short, I promise. At the same time, Florida has been used as a poster child by Trump, with the help of DeSantis, with the border protection protocols, the training of the police force, and a whole host of other topics. What would your policy be, and how would that differ from federal policies and what's happened so far?
Yeah, thank you. In my view, this is not controversial. I think it's been made controversial by the president and our governor for political reasons, or if they're value-based reasons, I think they're the wrong values. Let's start with the basics. We should have strong border security. We should have tall walls, but we should have wide gates that welcomes the refugee, that welcomes the asylee, that provides a pathway to work, a pathway to opportunity. That's a strength of our economy and a strength of our history. We all learned the words of Emma Lazarus, the sonnet, "Bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free." The lines before that say, "Keep, O distant lands, your storied pomp. Keep, you're rich, you're famous, you're fabulous. Send me, send us, send the United States. You're tired, you're poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. You're homeless, the wretched refuse tossed upon the shore. Behold, I lift my lamp by the golden door." That's a value, that's a principle that I am not afraid to defend. We should have strong border security, but we should be welcoming to the immigrant. And for the immigrant who's already here, I promise you this, the greatest threat to community safety is not the undocumented immigrant who's been going to work for 15 years without a speeding ticket to earn a living, to put food on the table and provide health care for their kids so they can learn English and have the American dream. We should welcome that person, recognize their contribution to our economy and to our culture. That is simply something that has to be done. And I'm afraid that my Republican friends, or the governor and the president, have gotten away with conflating immigration and crime. And it's wrong. It is morally wrong, but it's statistically wrong. There's a higher rate of violent and property crimes in native-born American communities than there are in our immigrant communities. But if you listen to Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, they would tell you that immigrants are the biggest threat we face as a nation. I think that is wrong. Now, I would say to my Democratic friends, that doesn't mean we should be soft on crime. We should be tough on crime. But that means if you were born here, if you immigrated here from Venezuela, Haiti, Cuba, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, or if you're a politician who uses Hope, Florida, to steal $10 million from the Medicaid program, if you break the law in Florida, you should be investigated and held accountable. I just don't think the undocumented individual who shows up every day to work hard and contribute to our economy for the opportunity to create the American dream for their kid, that is not the person that we need to use law enforcement officers or resources to go after. Maybe we should start using it to go after guns and drugs and sex trafficking and dirty politicians.
So recently there was a large sales tax reliefs for small business owners. Is there anything else in the agenda for small businesses to support them? Because in a city like this with so many corporate conglomerates, small businesses can use all the help they can. Yeah.
I certainly would support an extension of that and studies into what further relief could be provided. Though I don't do retail, I've been a small business owner of a firm for 20 years in different ways. And I think where we can create generous economic terms and environments for the small businesses, we need to do that. Whether it's a sales tax at the local level, a sales tax relief or reprieve at the local level, whether there are additional state credits that could be provided, I think there is something that we should always be pursuing. My biggest concern is in this economy, what does small business look like in 10 or 20 years? And I think it contributes to a broader conversation about what does Florida's economy look like in the next 10 to 20 years. I really struggle with that. What does housing look like in the next 10 to 20 years? What does the small business economy look like in the next 10 to 20 years? Are we going to continue to go down a road where we abandon multimodal and mass transit and transportation? Are we going to go down a road where healthcare becomes increasingly unaffordable, where housing becomes increasingly unaffordable? Look, we can't affect the price of goods as a result of tariffs, but there are things we can do in our own ag economy and other commodity economies that exist interstate to say we're going to continue to address the tight labor markets in ag by not fighting the immigrant community. We're going to continue to incentivize or provide credits to goods that are produced in Florida. I would say put it all on the table because I worry without creative thinking, and I would welcome your sidebar conversation on areas you think we should go. I worry without creative thinking that Florida's economy is simply going to be an economy that gets away from us. And Florida is unrecognizable to the Florida that I grew up in. It almost already is.
Do we have one last question?
Oh, hey, look who's there.
Hey, Kim Leonard with Politico. Can you talk about your evolution on the Affordable Care Act? Because it looks like from Congress.gov that you have voted to repeal the ACA before.
Yeah.
As a Republican, can you talk about what changed your mind that the ACA is in fact good policy?
Yeah, learning about the impact of affordable health care on communities, much like reproductive freedom. And this also gets to Medicaid expansion. This was absolutely a journey that followed much of my other journeys. So I was elected to Congress at a time where Obamacare was being rolled out. It hadn't been fully rolled out. I was a special election candidate during the very clunky rollout. Right, my opponent was Alex Sink, and even Alex Sink had to message test, keep what's working, fix what's broken, or something. Right, that was when I emerged, and so the additional increase in cost was also something we saw. We saw it by some news agencies, the lie of the year. If you keep your doctor, you can keep it. So context is important, right? 13 years ago, that was the context. Disruption of the healthcare market, loss of doctors when we were promised, if you want your doctor, you can keep it. Additional expenses, a disruption of the rollout. So yeah, that was the environment in which I was elected, and I opposed the ACA at the time. As I started serving and realized that Republicans were going to continue to put up votes to repeal it without a plan to replace it, I was part of what was the Tuesday group. It was a more moderate group of members, and eventually Charlie Dent, myself, and some others, I think Fred Upton, went to the speaker and said, we're no longer going along with any more votes to repeal. So I guess the first step, the first evolution was on the fact that Republicans did not have a health care plan. And so I was no longer going to vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act once it had started to really have an impact on individuals and families. Republicans never did have a health care plan for as long as I served. They never did. There was no alternative. And then when I left office, I said to Lawrence O'Donnell in January of 27, maybe January, sometime early 17, I said, listen, as a former member of Congress, I lost my health care. And what I knew in the new environment under the ACA is that there was now an opportunity to immediately enroll in health care because of the ACA. That was a real impact for me. Now, it didn't make economic sense for me to do that in 2017, but I'm on the exchange now. And part of it is recognizing the impact that it's had and the lack of any alternative. So listen, I really, I hate to put the spotlight on Ron DeSantis and Byron Donalds this week. But what Byron Donalds just proposed suggests that Floridians have enough savings to handle their own health care on the private market at market rates, and that's simply not the case. He proposed a product as though that's a solution to healthcare policy. We have yet to see a healthcare policy from Republicans that would ensure more people receive healthcare coverage, more people are covered, more people can afford healthcare. As I mentioned at the beginning, I would always like to look to the private sector for solutions. I think there are areas where the private market has become incapable of affordable solutions. Catastrophic coverage on your home is one. Healthcare coverage is another. Healthcare coverage is out of reach for too many people. Medicaid is something we all grew up with. We knew something, depending on your generation, it looked a little different. For some generations, it was the community health center that all families had to go to, and you saw the county doctor. But now Medicaid provides more than 40% of childbirth care, postpartum care. It provides much of our skilled nursing and essentially end-of-life care. It provides health care for the family with 2 kids. That's the Medicaid program now. And guess what? When we expand Medicaid in the state of Florida, we improve health outcomes, and it's an economic benefit to the state. So I'm afraid we're in this ideological wrestling match where Republicans think we simply cannot have the government do more in health care. And I'm in a place in my political career and ideological career where I'm saying we simply cannot have the government not step in. Because without it, we are going to see healthcare deserts in the state of Florida emerge in the next decade for the first time in decades, because rural hospitals are going to close. People right now having to drive 3 hours for care because a community clinic has closed and they have to go get specialty care somewhere else. The Medicaid program is essential. We're one of only 10 states that hasn't expanded it. So I guess the answer to your question is, what informed my move? Maybe logic and rationality and the recognition of good public policy over ideology. I sympathize with my Republican friends who are continuing to recycle economic arguments that are 20 years old and try to apply them to 2026. They simply don't. Because the healthcare economic policies of Republicans are going to ensure that more people in Florida go into next year without healthcare coverage. And I think we should be a state, and we need a governor that fights for more coverage for more Floridians.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to David and Michael, and let's give them a round of applause for being here today. And so I just want to say thank you again, David, for coming in here to the Economic Club of Miami. And I know it's tough being the man in the arena sometimes. And also it's got to be very challenging to run in a state like Florida for governor. It's a huge state, very diverse state, and we really want to thank you for making the time to be with us here at the Economic Club of Miami. And so we have a lot of issues that have been discussed. Thank you so much for all the great questions everybody has had. We will stay tuned for the next coming events that are being planned right now, and we'll be around here for a few more minutes. If you are still hungry, there's plenty of food there, so please grab some and take some back to your offices on the way home. And thanks for being with us today, and thank you again to both of these gentlemen. Appreciate it.